Hey guys, Jordan with the Young Turks and TYT Politics. I am fresh out of a St. Louis jail. I'm not looking so terrific, so excuse me. But, 16 hours wasn't so terrific. But anyway, if you're coming late to this, myself, about 160 others were arrested last night, myself and editor, cameraman, Tommy Tahifi Bayless. We were covering a protest. It was basically a continuation of about 2 weeks of protests here in St. Louis. The protest started after the acquittal of former police officer Jason Stockley. Jason Stockley in 2011 shot and killed 24-year-old Anthony Lamar Smith. He was an African American. The sequence of events was Jason Stockley and his partner essentially chased Anthony Lamar Smith from a Church's Chicken parking lot. It was about 3 miles, the chase. When they collided into Anthony Lamar Smith, Mr. Stockley shot him 6 times, killed him. During that chase, Mr. Stockley, the former police officer, was caught on audio saying, "I'm going to kill this motherfucker, you watch." Let me repeat that. "I'm going to kill this motherfucker, you watch." He then shot him. He died. And then, astoundingly, the officer was allowed to basically go in Anthony Lamar Smith's car and essentially, I think, plant the gun. The officer was acquitted 2 weeks ago. He was found not guilty. It was the judge's last case of his career. So after Michael Brown years ago, there have been many other African Americans murdered by police here in the St. Louis area. Outside of police brutality, this area definitely has a history of, it's not a history, it's present. Racism, economic and physical violence against African Americans. This is a Dixiecrat state, and the history, which I have learned over the last 16 hours in this jail, is pretty alarming. And frankly, you only have to be here in the St. Louis area, I'd say, for 15 minutes to know that African Americans are not even second-class citizens. They are treated as the scum underneath your shoe. Talking to a lot of these African Americans in the jail cell, we had about 36 people in our jail cell that's only supposed to have 31. Talking to these people, it's just horrifying hearing these stories, one after the other of harassment, vile phrases coming at them from the police. Basically, I talked to several who, whether it's their cousins, their brothers, their sisters, their fathers, have been murdered by police here in St. Louis, and no accountability, none at all. So we know what happened in Ferguson 2014. We know what happened there, and there was supposed to be, a conversation about race. Supposed to be, let's improve community policing. Well, the problem is not only in Ferguson. And the problem, by the way, is not only police brutality. The problem is economic brutality. Poverty here is astounding. And what I was originally coming here to cover, to tell you the truth, was the fact that minimum wage was rolled back. They had increased minimum wage to $10, which is not enough as it is, but they had increased it to $10, and the Republican governor, the Republican legislature rolled it back. So as the days go on, I will be reporting more on this. You can see the videos I did before the arrest. They're up on TYT Politics. That's youtube.com/TYT Politics. But let me explain what happened last night. I think it's very troubling, not only because journalists are supposed to be under the First Amendment, but unfortunately, it's not only about me and a journalist getting arrested. By my count, there were 7 other journalists that got arrested. It's what's going on with these protests, the brutality happening towards the protesters, and no accountability. And frankly, the corporate media is not doing its job. So I got here with Ty a few days ago. Again, we were going to cover many things, from minimum wage being rolled back. There is also a very, very dangerous nuclear waste site that is very, very close to an underground chemical fire that, shocker, the EPA is not doing anything about. So I've done stuff on that. But like I said, there's these protests going on for 2 weeks. Protesters, like in Standing Rock and Ferguson and Baltimore, tear gas, mace, pepper spray, people being attacked by police with their shields. Just last night, I saw, I think, somebody in his 60s, not resisting arrest, slammed by a police visor. So I and other journalists were told there's going to be a protest tonight, meaning last night. So we go down to a location, then that location moves. Before you know it, we end up on the highway. To be clear, I mean, I nor the other journalists were part of organizing the protest. All we did was receive a message, hey, this is where a protest is going to be. No different than a Facebook page having an address, which it did, or anything else. So literally just responding as journalists, there's going to be a protest. Okay. The protest moves to the highway. The protesters, as far as I could see, they weren't armed. I saw one person with an assault rifle, but other than that, not armed. They successfully blockaded, it was I-64, which is a major highway here. So they successfully blockade the highway. I'll talk to protesters, but assumption is they want to disrupt traffic. I have spoken with people here. Their intent is to be nonviolent, but they are not trying to be peaceful. They have said to me there's a difference between nonviolence and being peaceful. They are not trying to be pleasant and just ask the police, hey, please stop killing us. Yeah, that doesn't work. So they are trying to disrupt traffic. They are trying to disrupt business. They're trying to hit St. Louis and the politicians and the business owners where it hurts, which is the wallet. So they successfully blocked the highway and they marched, I'd say, probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles. Then police started swarming in on the highway, so they got off the highway. They exited off an exit ramp, and myself and the other journalists followed them. We were live on Facebook, we were live on YouTube, and we were covering it. So we're now on a main road, and all of a sudden you see, by my count, at least 40, 50 police cars swarming in. And you see police like in Standing Rock and Ferguson and Baltimore, militarized gear, lined up, I'd say probably 200 to 300 police officers. And what they did was they formed a quasi, like a kettle, to basically enclose the protesters from the front, both sides, to the back. There was no exit for the protesters. I was there. I did not hear the police once say, leave now, leave now. Even if I did hear that, it's a little difficult. You'd have to be Rambo to leave if there's no exit to leave. So essentially, the protesters were entrapped and could not leave. Now, if you want to argue, well, they were blocking traffic and this and that, they deserve to be arrested, you can make that argument, that's fine. But the point is, for police, it's typical that you would give a dispersal warning, disperse or risk arrest. That did not happen. More importantly, they've done this now 2 other times where they, again, are forming a kettle. This is a tactic so that there can be no way protesters can disperse, because the goal of the police in this instance was to arrest as many protesters as possible. From talking to protesters, as I said, I had about 36 in my jail cell. The jail cell is only supposed to have 31. Talking to them, the main issue that enraged police so much is that the protesters successfully hijacked the highway. The police don't like being embarrassed, and it is kind of embarrassing to get the highway hijacked. My partner in legal journalism, Tommy Tahifi Bayless, over there. So, bottom line, the protesters blocked the highway, then blocked the road. There were no guns. There were no water bottles being thrown at police. There was no violence towards police. The police did not give any dispersal at all notice. And again, even if they did, there was no way to disperse. And one of the leaders of the protest, State Senator Bruce Franks, was saying, "Where would you like us to go? Where would you like us to go?" I personally, with my own eyes, saw Legal observers were the first to be arrested. If you know anything about protests, legal observers are there and not supposed to be arrested because they are there to observe what the police are doing. So right there, you have an illegal action. The legal observers, off limits, not supposed to touch them. In Standing Rock, in Ferguson, in Baltimore, wherever there have been protests, a truck showing solidarity, you're not supposed to arrest legal observers. Then they started arresting journalists. There were myself, Ty, and about 6 others.
Yeah.
So about 8.
It was 8 altogether.
8 altogether. Myself, Ty, other independent journalists, people who have been live streaming. STL Today, I believe, was there. STL News, and Revolutionary Z. Revolutionary Z is another independent journalist who has been here on the ground for the last few weeks. So Ty and I were saying, well, what are you doing? We're the media. Not because we're arrogant, but like you're supposed to be able to cover protests. Again, we were not involved in organizing the protest. We were not involved in the protest. We were there to cover it because, like legal observers, part of the media's role is to show you what the police are doing. Not only show you what I thought was a very beautiful protest, but to show you what the police are doing. Are they following the law? Are they brutalizing? Are they protecting the citizens? So we were arrested, I'd say, within, I don't know, 10 minutes of the standoff on that main road, not the highway. Ty actually was cuffed pretty hard, contrary to me, who I wasn't cuffed hard at all. If you notice, one difference between us, besides that I'm better.
I don't have hair.
Besides that I'm better looking, he's black and I'm white. So he was cuffed very hard. I was treated like
I literally had a huge bruise.
He had a huge bruise, he's saying. So basically, we get to the jail. There was 160 people that they corralled here. Protesters, journalists, legal observers, all that. It was very clear from the beginning they wanted to keep us there as long as humanly possible. Like I said, they were not happy that the protesters were able to get that highway. I think it's embarrassing for the police that you can't even control your highway, and they were pissed off, shall we say. In addition to the dozens of conversations I had with protesters in the jail cell, that would be white, black, straight, gay, trans. I spoke with many people, and there's a lot of horror stories about the St. Louis Police Department that you will be hearing over the next few days. As I walked out, I told the police officer I wouldn't have such a smile because you're not going to like the Young Turks after the next few days. I personally witnessed, I believe, late teens to early 20s young man begging for his medication. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 10 times, not 20 times, at least 50 times over the course of 16 hours. I don't want to say what medication, it's his business, but anxiety medication, depression medication. He was on the verge of panic attacks, and frankly, it seemed he could be on the verge of psychosis. There are some mental illnesses that if you miss any dosage, it could be a psychotic break. I've had family in that instance. So the police were literally taunting this young man. I heard a police officer say, well, maybe don't protest next time, in reaction to him asking for medication. We also heard police taunting the protesters, hurling insults at them. Again, well, don't protest next time, giggling at them, really kind of just having a good time. Homophobic slurs we heard. This is, again, from the St. Louis City Police. It's a whole convoluted story. There's the St. Louis City, the St. Louis County. I don't quite get it yet, but this was St. Louis City Police. So withholding medication. This young man that I just told you about, they withheld medication, and I guess because the young man was getting a little too loud, they put him in solitary confinement. So this is a young man, you're withholding his anxiety medication, you're withholding his depression medication, you put him in solitary confinement. Like I just said, this young man is basically on the verge of a potential mental break. And you put him in solitary confinement. Then, as I walked out of that jail, he was still there, the young man, and I asked him, have they given you your medication yet? No. They did not give him this medication. And I have learned through talking to dozens, this is standard operating procedure for the St. Louis Police Department. They did not, in addition to not giving the young man his medicine, and that was just one young man. There were other people asking for medication that did not get it. By my count, there was at least 5 or 6 that I personally spoke to, didn't get the medication. Talking to other people in my jail cell, you quickly learned that the...
Give me 1 hot second, just let me mount and take a half a second. And then we can still go live. I just so they can hear you better.
Hold on 1 second. Do I need the headphones still?
No, they'll hear you on the mic.
Thanks.
Wait, is this?
Bruce, if he's anywhere to be found.
Go ahead.
So, as I was saying, they withhold medication. They didn't offer protesters approximately for 13 to 14 hours a damn thing to drink. No water, no nothing. And they didn't offer food till the end. To this moment, I don't know what I was arrested for. I don't believe the protesters know what they were arrested for. I believe possibly trespassing, which is a misdemeanor, but I did not get any paperwork on my way out. I was not told I was formally being charged with anything. So essentially, they just held us for 16 hours. I think if they could hold us longer, they would have, but there might have been some behind-the-scenes negotiations that went on that got us out quicker. Again, this is the very Cliff Notes version. Medication withhold, homophobic slurs, racial slurs, threats. Hey, maybe don't protest next time. And overall, a continuation of pretty much treating African Americans and their allies, because there was a lot of white people that took part in this protest, as second-class citizens. And it continues the history of 21st century segregation that is still in place here in St. Louis. And I'm going to report on it over the next few days, and Ty's going to report on it over the next few days. But there's a few things. Number one, I got arrested. Great. I'm not going to it's not about me. Ty and I are fine, and thank you for tweeting and all that good stuff. But there's very important constitutional ramifications of this. I don't know, because I have 125 people who texted me and I have a lot of tweets. As far as I could see, CNN, the New York Times, none of these places have said a word about journalists in St. Louis being arrested for doing journalism, which is very troubling, because whether I like CNN or not, if CNN people or reporters or anchors are getting arrested for covering the news, I would be the first one online to defend those reporters. It's not about whether you're corporate media or independent media, whether you make $1 million, whether you make $10 million a year or a lot less. There's a very, very thin line between a dictatorship and authoritarian governments and democracies. And part of democracy is freedom of the press. So we need to know from the St. Louis Police Department, from the mayor of St. Louis, from the governor of St. Louis, and from the federal government, what does the Constitution protect in terms of journalism? What does the Constitution protect? Secondly, I think it's very important to add, this is not like a very rare thing that happened last night. They have been treating people like this next to me, which I'll talk to in a minute. They've been treating people, black, white, straight, gay, trans, like this in St. Louis way past the last 2 weeks when this acquittal happened. And let me get you in to explain that. State Senator Bruce Franks, you were one of the leaders of this protest. We talked in the jail cell. I was just explaining what happened. I want to really get across to the audience that this is kind of just another Tuesday for you guys.
Yeah, this is our, they say, why don't we work? This is our work. You know, this is what we're going to continue to do. We are energized. We are ready. We are unapologetic. And this is what's going to happen. We're going to be consistent at the end of the day. You know, they are expecting us to chill out. They're expecting this to deter us, but they don't know. This just ignited a whole nother fire up under us. Our governor told us we weren't going to take the highway. Our governor told us we wouldn't. if they haven't protected anything since the verdict, they protected our highways.
And I really want to get across because what they did last night, from my viewpoint, was entrapment.
Absolutely.
Can you kind of talk about the kettle and closing you guys in? I didn't really hear any disperse notifications.
So what's been happening is they've been forming these squares around us, basically boxing us in. Few times giving really vague, light dispersal orders, and then saying move, move, move when we got nowhere to move. And yesterday we didn't get a dispersal order, but we had a line moving at us and move. And I went to the front and I said, move where? Do y'all want us to disperse or do y'all want to lock us up? With no reply. And then as they moved in and the bike cops took that other side, they said, well, everybody's getting locked up. Well, if that's the case, let's just take to the streets then. We're not going to sit here on this sidewalk. And even for them to block the sidewalk as they're walking by, which is unconstitutional and illegal. And then basically give everybody the same charges when everybody wasn't on the highway. And so, yeah, this is what we've seen. This is what we've been fighting against. But we're going to continue to fight it.
And I think, I just got here. I don't know as much as you or others. It seems to me that this and what you're doing is about a lot more than just Anthony Lamar Smith. That's what kind of spearheaded the latest rounds of protests. But it seems to me this is kind of like that final straw in the economic violence and the segregation.
Absolutely. It's the systematic oppression that we've been going through, period. Anthony Lamar Smith was and is the reason why we started at the point where we did, because of that verdict. And we will continue to fight for justice for Anthony Lamar Smith. But we will continue to fight for justice for Mike Brown, Vondarian Myers, Isaac Holmes, Isaiah Hammond, and all of our other fallen soldiers who we feel were killed unjustly. But like you said, it adds to a whole different narrative now when we're talking about every single thing that aids to our oppression and what's actually killing us in the system. And it's the system as a whole, not even just the police. So this speaks to all the powers that be. It speaks to all the politicians that want to be lazy and not show up and not say nothing about their constituents in the districts in which this is happening. We gonna let them know. No more of that. No more of the police killing us. No more of ineffective politicians. No more ineffective clergy. No more ineffective community leaders. Like it has to change. It will change, and we're gonna make sure it changes.
And that would include Senators Claire McCaskill.
Absolutely. That includes all of them, from the federal all the way down. That includes Lacey Clay. That includes and anybody else. Because it's not about you being a black politician that represents a black neighborhood or a white politician that represents a black neighborhood. Ineffective leadership is ineffective leadership, and we got to start calling it out no matter what the party is, period. Because if we keep getting stuck behind party lines and just accepting folks because they're just Democrats, what are we doing for the people in the economically distressed communities that are disengaged with the process of politics, of that political empowerment, political education? We're just rubber stamping everything when they're not even showing that they're willing to move and fight in the best interest of poor people or black folks.
And I explained to the audience, but I'm sure this isn't your first rodeo. Can you kind of talk about just the, I think, illegal activities going on in these jails, withholding medications, harassment, putting people in solitary confinement for no reason? Just last night, these things happened.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to a bigger issue with our prisons in general. I think that also speaks to the narrative of when we have somebody that controls, that could be controlling, right? But we have rogue employees, we have rogue workers. We have to find out how we can hold them accountable. And we got to make sure that our directors and so on and so forth hold them accountable. One thing I can say is that our director here, Director Glass, really sat down with us as soon as I got out and asked me about what was going on, and I explained to him in depth about some of the things that were going on. And this ain't the first time I had to come to him about some stuff that he actually turned around and fixed. But you're right, it goes on. We just got to make sure that we have directors like him to be able to hold these things accountable when they're brought to him.
And Jordan, I don't mean to interrupt, but the show just texted and said, "Are you ready to go?" On this?
Real quick. Reverend Darrell Gray. He's a great, amazing leader here in the community. He was arrested for no reason and beaten about a couple days ago. He said to me, this is the new Selma. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I agree that this is another part of history. And whether folks like to look at it or not, I'm pretty sure when they were marching in Selma and organizing in Selma, and when they were organizing the Montgomery boycott, and when Martin Luther King gave his last speech about I've seen the mountaintop, I'm pretty sure they wasn't looking at it like, well, this is history. Right? They were doing what they felt was right, what they knew was right. And that's the exact same things we doing. And people going to be able to go back and look at how St. Louis fought against these injustices, how St. Louis stood up to these injustices, from Mike Brown to Anthony Lamar Smith and everybody in between and after.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. All right, I got to go. I'll be on the Young Turks now. Bye-bye.